Hello. I appreciate you're busy, so that's why I've put together this bite-sized review for mastering interviews. It's an opportunity to remind yourself of the fundamentals of interviews before we meet in small group practice. So let's consider what happens during an interview, and you'll see how important it is to make a very strong first and last impression, because that's what's remembered by the interviewer. And that's why it's so important for you to take some time to prepare. So what are recruiters looking for? Can you do the job? Does your background fit with what they want? And are you demonstrating your competencies using really compelling examples? Will you do the job? So what do you know about the role, the company, and your commitment comes through when you're talking about that? And finally, will you fit in? Does the role bring out your strengths? Have you really articulated your motivation? And could they see you working with them? These are some of the questions that you might encounter, and you'll find out more details about them on LBS Careers on Canvas. So I just want to go through the questions that will be most useful for you to work on and prepare before you come to the small group interviews. So let's start out with tell me about yourself. And we did mention this a bit in What's Your Story in terms of how to make sure that your story is consistent throughout your whole job search process. In the interview, it's really important that you look at this as a gift when somebody asks you, tell me about yourself. It's an opportunity for you to say who you are, give some highlights of your expertise. So don't go into absolutely everything, but try to prioritize what's really important, perhaps looking at your last position in terms of giving some really compelling examples of your skills. And then why are you here? What is it that you're looking for? You might even talk about why you took an MBA to move you into this new position that you're now looking for. Competency-based questions are probably the questions that you'll get asked the most. And basically, a behavior competency question is designed to get evidence of past success as a predictor of future success. And you'll find they often begin with phrases like, tell me about a time, or give me an example, or talk me through. And most organizations end up testing for somewhere between 8 to 12 competencies. And they'll ask you more than one question to test those competencies. So on this slide, you'll see that the competencies are listed on the right-hand side: communication, analytical skills, leadership, interpersonal skills. And there's some sample questions that you might be asked. There are many, many more examples of these on LBS Careers, as well as some really great practice videos that you can watch. Just a reminder, when you're answering competency-based questions, it's very, very important that you structure your answer. Not only does this help you to give a more concise, insightful answer, but it really helps your interviewer be able to take on board your information and take down notes, because they'll be comparing you to other candidates. So we recommend that you use the CAR technique, challenge, action, result. And roughly you're spending about 10 to 20% in the beginning, setting up what the challenge is 60%, or the majority of your answer, in the actions that you took. What did you actually do? And then somewhere between 20%, 30%, depending on how much you spent at the beginning, just talking about the result that you achieved. Another type of question I want to mention to you is strength-based questions, and this is becoming more popular. It's a type of interviewing that more and more companies are starting to use. And you'll find the idea behind strength-based questions is if you're using your natural strength and you get into flow, then you're really doing what you love rather than just what you can do, and you'll be able to be more productive. That's the psychology behind it. And companies usually develop some sort of a strength matrix, often by analyzing a different number of factors. It could be looking at high, medium, and low performers in the role that they're interviewing for, and also taking into consideration some of their competencies, their personal attributes, their attitudes toward the work. So there's a lot of science that goes behind creating these strength-based questions. But they're a little bit more difficult to prepare for. So unlike competency-based questions, where it feels like a straightforward example, these questions feel a lot more like a chat, and that can be difficult for you to understand what it is that they're looking for. So assessors are trained to look for a couple different things. First of all, your energy and authenticity. So is this really a strength that you're talking about? So this is often why companies try to use these interviews to get down to not rehearsed answers, but really getting down to what people really feel about certain things. They'll also look for high performance and strengths. So again, they're going to be looking for the strengths that are core to the role that they're recruiting for, and making sure that you're giving some really good evidence to demonstrate that you have those strengths. And also sometimes they're looking to make sure that your personal attributes are aligned to the company values. So that's definitely how they use it. Let me give you an example of some of these questions. I think that's an easier way to show you. So what is good service? What do you do when something at work bores you? What would you do if you had an extra hour in the day? These are all types of strength-based questions. Again, feel like they're having a chat with you. And one great way to structure your answer to these is to answer them truthfully. There isn't a right or wrong answer. It's what you feel. If I had an extra hour in the day, I might use that to rest and relax, maybe go out and take a walk in the park, because that helps to re-energize me to come back to my desk. For example, then I would certainly put in an example using the CAR technique, where you can show a specific time that you actually did do that and it had a positive result on your work. Let's talk now about challenging questions. And these are the questions I'd like you to think back in the past that you've gotten at previous interviews that you found difficult. And these will be individual depending on your interview experience. Which ones do you really struggle with? It's good to keep those in mind as you go through the small group interview practice. Think about how you can start to apply some of these techniques to those questions you feel more challenging. And at any time, if you want to come in and work with a coach on challenging questions, you can bring the question and really practice it again and again and get some feedback. But one of the biggest challenging questions we get are tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. I think strengths are a little bit less challenging. Pretty much we have an idea what our strengths are. But it's also important to provide some evidence and some facts behind, not just I'm strong at this, that, and the other, but some real clear CAR examples of how you have demonstrated that strength in your work. And not just once, but potentially more than once. So it's a recurring strength. Weaknesses can be a little bit more difficult. We all have weaknesses. It's recognizing them that's important, and the interview is really looking for you to be self-aware. So don't try to come up with a weakness that you think sounds good. Really find an authentic, genuine weakness, but obviously don't mention any that would directly impair your ability to do the job. And the way to structure this answer is describe what the weakness is and then explain how you're working to overcome that. So I used to get nervous giving presentations. So what I've done is I've become involved in the Toastmasters Club at LBS, where I'm giving presentations every 2 weeks, and that's really helped to build my confidence so I don't feel quite as nervous when I have to give presentations to large groups. Just giving you an example of a weakness, but really try to be authentic and pick something that is yours and the way that you're coping with a strategy to overcome that weakness. The other thing is important to be thinking about. We won't cover it in the small group interviews, but I want you to be aware of what are the questions you're going to be asking at interview. And obviously questions that naturally arise from the conversation, making sure that you're present, you're really listening, are great questions to be asking. But it's great to have a few prepared too. You might want to think about asking the interviewer about their experience at the company or showing the kind of research that you've done. Here are just some examples on the screen now of some questions that you could ask. But I would recommend that you try to prepare 4 or 5 questions that you bring with you just so you have something you could ask. They may very well get answered during the course of the interview, but it gives you something to talk about at the end so you can have that strong finish. Finally, I just want to point out to you further resources. I really encourage you, if you haven't done an interview in a while and you need to refresh your interview skills, please do look on LBS Careers. It's underneath Develop your interview technique. You'll see we go through the different methods, different question types. There's a really excellent interview preparation form I'd recommend, as well as one to think about evaluating yourself after the interview. Another tool that we have that we subscribe to that's free for you to use is called Interview Stream. The great thing about Interview Stream, it's 24/7. You can practice an interview at 2 a.m. in the morning if you've got one the next day, which is great. What happens is you get on, there are sample questions, or you can put your own questions in. You can practice them, you're videotaped, and then the videotape is played back to you. So you can look at not only the content of your answers, the quality, how well structured it was, but also things like your body language and your eye contact. Finally, just to highlight the further support that you'll be getting through the Career Center, these small group interviews are running now, but we also do them again, practicing with you in the springtime. This is all to get you prepared for the compulsory one-to-one mock interview. You've already received a survey about that. They're going to be run from the middle of November. And those are also in small groups with an external facilitator, but I want you to treat them like the real thing. It's the closest thing we can give you to an actual interview. So it'll be somebody external who you haven't necessarily worked with before, who has recruited in those sectors, and they'll be coming in, and I want you to turn up prepared, dressed for the interview, and treat it just like a real interview. You'll be getting verbal feedback as well as written feedback. And finally, there's other things coming up for cases and technical interviews later on in the year. So just a checklist before I go. Consider the feedback that you've had from previous interviews. What are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you want to work on? Your own personal goals for these small group interview practice. And take some time before you actually come to the session to look through some sample behavior competency questions. Come up with the best way to prepare is to come up with a few bullet points of ideas of what you can talk about, not a memorized answer, but a few things that you can talk around those different competencies, perhaps communication skills, analytical skills, problem-solving skills. Pick out 5 to practice with, and then come up with some sample answers to those questions. Thanks for listening. I hope this has helped to give you a head start so you come to the small group interview practice well prepared.